Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Salem, South Dakota, map created by Federal for Farming Simulator 11. You know, I thought the previous episode would be my final one. Maybe this one will be. You may recall in the previous episode we had a problem kind of closing things out, and I opted to start here kind of on the title screen to highlight again what it is. It says here, it's intended to be spring wheat, and apparently in this area, they windrow it before they combine it. So it says, swath the wheat into windrows with the included swather and harvest the windrows with the included combine pickup header. Well, you may recall that this flat out didn't work. We could make the windrows easy enough, and it laid down what looked like a wheat straw windrow. So, okay, all well and good. But then when we came along with the combine and the pickup header to harvest it, it started popping errors in the log, and it said our combine had grass in it, and it refused to take in wheat, which is what the desired outcome was. And instead, we kind of got these grass windrows appearing behind the combine, which was just kind of a bit bizarre. So, as so often is the case, sometimes these problems gnaw on me, and I wanted to try to fix it, and I think I figured out a way to do it. This, what I'm going to share here, is one way of doing it. There probably are other ways that it could be accomplished, and I really don't know. I don't remember when I played it previously. I don't think I used the swather to cut the wheat and then lay it in windrows and then have the pickup header. I don't think I did that at all, and in fact, in the game, you don't have to use that setup at all. You can use the standard wheat head, and it will cut the grain just fine, kind of the conventional way, that we're used to. So, without further ado, maybe we'll just briefly hop in game here, and here we are. Once again, we have a stable map, no errors, at least not that I can see here. Cars are starting to come. And so, we kind of left off out here in the harvest field. We harvested soybeans, which is actually rape in the field, or canola. The map author just swapped the textures to make it really easy. And therein, by the way, is another problem, which I didn't solve, but you may recall in the last episode that when this was harvesting, we could start to see the rape and hear the texture. It didn't look like soybeans at all. So there would be another item to fix in here if we really wanted to be ambitious. And the map author used a clever way to make it pretty easy for any equipment. Most of the time back in this time era, if you wanted specialty crops, you had to do a whole lot of work in the map, and some of which I'm going to be showing you here in a moment, in order to include things like soybeans in addition to the regular crops. And then, not only did you have to put it in the map, but then you also had to modify all your equipment, such as a combine to be able to harvest it, your trailers to be able to haul it, and it's a lot of work. So the map author chose to say, hey, we don't grow canola in this area, or at least not in the map. So he swapped some textures, and it's sort of a band-aid solution, but it makes it really, really easy for anyone to just kind of hop into the map and play it. Anywho, this is kind of where we left off. I'm going to step out of the game, and we're going to talk about how we... Actually, you know what? I don't even think... Hold on a second. Let me at least drive my tractor over there. I'll drop this here. at least gonna go over to, yeah, so here the combine came along here and we got all this grass spitting out the back. And this should be wheat, it should look just like straw. So here's kind of where we were messing around in the field and trying to do the harvest here the way it's said to do it. And you'll notice there are some other things that I did in here in a slightly different colored windrow here from what we had in here before. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. It is, in fact, a different windrow. And what we'll see later is when we come in here with the combine and the pickup header, it will now pick this up. It'll turn it into wheat the way we want it to. And it will ignore the grass. It will ignore the other windrow sitting here, which is output. And part of the problem, by the way, that the game had, at least in these versions, maybe it's been worked on kind of in the later versions, when you set up these fruits in the game and you tell it that it has a windrow, for example, we're looking at wheat right here. And wheat is one of those crops that has a windrow. But to the game, what it means to have a windrow is that is something that comes after or post-harvest. It is the output, it is the threshed straw, if you will, that forms the windrow. What the game didn't really have a means to do is kind of what this app author, is suggesting that we do. He says windrow it first and then combine it. Well, the problem with that is when we were dealing with these other windrows is when you cut it, lay down a windrow, and then come along with a pickup header, even if you get it working, it'll pick it up and you can force it to give you grain. But the problem is it's going to be dropping another windrow right behind the combine, and if you wanted, you could come and combine it again and again and again, and you keep getting more and more grain. And plus, it's hard to see where you've been and where you haven't been. I'm hoping using a little bit different colors that we'll be able to tell, hey, this is a windrow to combine up here, and this one over here is what it looks like after it's been combined. So that'll hopefully help visuals, just a little bit. And plus, you can no longer just combine it over and over. When you pick this up, it's gone, it ain't coming back, and all it's going to leave is the straw, which you can bale, but you can't combine or to do anything with. So how to fix it? So let me, like I say, hop out of the game. So we'll just abort and dump the game. Adding a crop is many times a big deal. I mean, there are whole videos dedicated to adding a fruit to a map, and this really isn't intended to kind of show all that. I'm kind of just trying to add a fix. My goal is to try to fix it so we can windrow the spring wheat, we can pick up the windrow and get wheat from it and then move on, and not be able to combine it again. So one of the first changes that I had to make are some different map assets. So I am in the Salem, South Dakota map. I went into the texture file, foliage, kind of where the map author has all this. In here there's textures. This is what renders in game. When we put a grass windrow down, the combine, here's the wheat windrow. There should be a barley one up. Here's a barley one. They're just slightly different colors. And you see all the distance textures for when you fade between near distance and far distance. So all those are sitting in here. So I said this is probably as good a place to put it as any. So I think what I did is I took foliage wheat windrow, which is already perfectly set up. I copy, pasted it, and here it is up here. I renamed it to spring wheat. And in a picture editor, I think I pulled up the color of the, let me go grab it here. This is all within the picture editor. Where's the wheat? Wheat diffuse. Probably this right here. So here's the file. This is what's going to render in game. So right now, I believe we are seeing harvestable wheat. So we're seeing this. There is a tinge of green in it. So somewhere in here, maybe it was over in here, I don't remember, I used what's called a color picker. That's this little tool in here, and I just clicked it on there, then came over to, and this was formerly wheat, and I said, okay, now I'm going to take the color I picked, and this one here is to recolor everything, that we see. So you need to kind of give it, a big spacing. So maybe to do it, so you get, maybe see the circle here, and you just recolor it. Let me see if it'll do it here. Yeah, see, I'm recoloring it with what I grabbed, and I'm not going to save this, of course, but this is all I did. So I copied what was there, and then I recolored it to something else that was approximately what resembled the spring wheat. That's all I did. So I put it in here, and I saved it, and I was done. And again, I'm not going to save it here because I've already done it. That was one file. And then because I was going to do it kind of in a little bit different means, and I'll try to explain that in a moment, I created a new, oh gosh, I don't even know what to call this kind of a file, but I went into the map. It's a weight file. Maybe that's the way to call it, or a girly file. I could make the girly file. But these are what are called weight files. So if we open grass weight, and everywhere that you see, I wonder if this is the underlying color. Maybe this is a poor example. Let me get, is there a rock one? Here it is. So this is just a black file, and this is the whole map. So wherever there is a texture of rock, it is shown here in white. And so this is kind of what tells the game, when we open the map in game, or we open it in the editor, these colors here tell it where the rock is supposed to show. And as we make changes in the editor and save it, it of course makes changes to this file here. So I needed another similar file, but I needed one totally blank. So I created one called spring wheat windrow density, just a ping file. And so this one is totally black. I had to make sure it was big enough, so I made it a big one because I wanted everything as, it probably requires a little bit more punch to do a bigger file. Probably could have done it in a 2048 by 2048, but I opted to do a big one. It just has to be square, and this is going to record wherever there's a windrow. Now we could place the spring wheat windrow in particular in the editor, or it'll be used later in the game. So first we create it by PNG. And then now that we have these files, see, you'll notice there's a girly file here, GRLE. It creates the GRLE file after you save it in the editor. So I started with this. I don't even think this is used anymore. It now it converted it over to a girly file or whatever, and it'll put it in the save game kind of going forward. But now that we created it, our map, of course, doesn't know that it exists, nor does it know about the texture file that we created for the new windrow texture. So what we next do, after we create these new assets, is we open the map's i3D file in a text editor. I use Notepad++, so I opened it over here. Here's map 01 i3D. And anytime you open one of these i3D, they're all structured similarly. There's a section in here, asset, talks about the exporter or whatever. That's the program, the editor program used to create it. And there's a section of files. So these are all the assets that are called or used in the map. So with the new files that we created 2 of them. We want to make sure that they are listed here in the files. And so let me just see if I can find them real quick. Spring wheat. And there we go. Now it's giving it a file ID of 89. I didn't give it an 89. Anytime you add files in here, give it a huge number. You know, I think I gave it a number like 10,000. And then the other one was file 20,000, you know, just big numbers. And then later when you save it in the editor, it will rename the file IDs and everything as it pleases. But anyway, point being, I had to tell it that I have this new file I want to put in here, this spring wheat windrow density PNG. You got to tell it exactly where it is or it isn't going to work. File name conventions very particular. It's best if you use lowercase and uppercase. Those should match as close as you can. So that is one of them. And the other, let me see if I can locate. Here it is, foliage. So you remember we created that foliage file. Same thing again. We're adding it in here. We're telling it in the files that we have it. Now the next section after the files, if I can go back up to the top here. Oh, blimey. It's not gonna let me just go back to the top and make the, here we go. After files are materials. And what we want to do, a material is something used by the program, and anytime you have or used by the game for something used in the game. And anytime you have a windrow, it's a certain type of material and you want certain things done to it. You know, it's going to look a certain way, it's going to behave a certain way. And this is where you define what those materials are, and you tell them what files to use, and a lot of times there is a shader that is given to it. So when I think of spring wheat windrow, all I really want to do is say, where is the windrow for, say, barley straw or wheat straw? So let me see if I can find, just find something straw. Oh, see, this is going way down there. Yeah, I don't want to go down there yet. Let me see, can I find wheat? Wheat particle system, that is it. Wheat material, that is possibly, let me see, is there another, that's spring wheat. Okay, let me go back. I don't know if there's one for windrow. Here's barley windrow material. That's sugar beet, meadow, dry grass. And get down into the next section, way down there. So, well, let's just look at barley for the moment. We'll just do this again. So you see, barley windrow is set up. It's given when you put this in. So basically what I did is I copied like this whole thing and I added it to the bottom. Now, you can't just have a duplicate, so I renamed it what I wanted it to be, and you just look at the pieces here. Material ID. Well, every single one of these materials has its own ID. I gave it my own ID number, and again, I used something really big. So since 10,000 and 20,000 were used, I called it 30,000. And I'm being really creative here. Then I kept ambient color, same thing here. Custom shader. One of the things I wanted to make sure of, well, see, this is windrow material, but custom shader, I want to make sure it's a windrow type shader that's being used. So to make sure that is true, we can look up file ID equals 36, and let's see where it takes us. Cutted wheat foliage shader. All right, that's probably what we need. So let me just look up. See, I went clear back up top here again. Shouldn't have maybe done that. I'm just trying to explain different steps. So, spring wheat. Let me just look that up. Spelling. All right, so here's the one in the middle. And again, when I established it, I put it at the bottom. And and then gave it a huge number. It changed the material ID number later, but I defined the name that it would be given. Material ID, left this alone. I left the custom shader ID. You'll notice it's 36. That's the same file ID up there where the barley windrow is handled. Texture file ID, field ID number 90, or file ID number 90. This, of course, would refer to the file that has it has the texture that you see visually. Remember the windrow that I copied over from wheat and I gave it a slightly different color? That's the out one. So when I put it in there, if this was 10,000 was a number that I gave it kind of up on the top section, so referred to it here, and again it changed the file ID later, but it would keep it kind of in parity. And this was something, another custom shader parameter. It fades out from our viewed at 90 meters to 100. That's kind of what's going on here. So I just copied all that. It's in here. It's real simple. Just copied what I had, so wasn't really creating anything from scratch. After the material section, there's an enormous section in here on shapes. This is where every single shaped item in the map is defined. In later versions, the shapes file would be taken out of the i3D file, or there would be a reference in here to where the shape file was. But in the early versions of the game, all of the shapes were defined in here, and I will collapse this, and as you'll see, it's an enormous section. We're on line 1612, and we continue nearly 1,000,000 lines later. So there's a lot going on here in shapes, and there's something on dynamics with a particle thing that's going on. We won't talk about that. Then we get to the scene. And one of the first items, in the scene, I'm going to have a few basic things, but this is following everything we see in the scenograph, that's in the editor. So of course the sun and there's some cameras that come first, then you have a terrain item, and within the terrain there's going to be layers where various things are defined. And most of the time, when you come and define things for crops, you're going to be in what's called a foliage multi-layer or a foliage sub-layer. And you open the standard map that came with the game, and this is all in here too. You'll see the wheat, the grass, the rape, and so forth. You'll see other parts of each that are defined. Wheat has also wheat windrow. Well, come to find out, this is where the standard crops are identified, but you can also define other foliage multi-layers that aren't part of the regular crops. So if you've ever wondered how come when I drag a cultivator over the top of some stones or bushes or whatever, it doesn't remove them. Well, that's because the coding behind the cultivator or plow is only designed to take out this. And ditto with equipment recognizing windrows and so forth that are up in here. They're adept at doing that. But when you put it in what's called the multi-layer or other multi-layers, it doesn't recognize it. So we're going to have to do a little bit of coding to get all that fixed. Anyway, suffice it to say, I added a foliage multi-layer here. The density map ID, this is probably the technical term for it that I didn't say earlier. I think I called it a weight file, the girly file. Remember, we put that clear up there in the files. So when I first did this, I would have said this was density map ID is 20,000. Whatever the file number was, clear up above. This I just copied over from how the other multi-layers are set up. There's one channel. You either have the windrow or you don't. So that's kind of what's going on here. Foliage sublayer. We put in our terms spring wheat underscore windrow. The spelling here is very important because we're later going to be referring to this in some of our mods. The game is going to search this file. It picks up anything that is underscore windrow and kind of turns that into a windrow for us. So spelling here is important. And then I just set this up for the most part. There's a whole bunch of stuff over here I won't get into. Maybe I've talked about it in other videos. Basically tried to set it up similar to what the wheat windrow is up here. And there's even additional attributes I could have added in here. But suffice it to say, this is how we kind of get it here into the map. And oh yeah, one of the items in here that's critical is material ID. And again, when I did this the first time, this was a number like 30,000. Whatever I gave it up in the material ID, you gotta link all those together so they talk to each other and that it all works. So we've added assets to the map. We've added them into the i3D file. And if you ever do this, I would recommend, when you make the changes in here, it's all text, you're gonna save it, leave the thing open just in case it doesn't work. What you want to do next is open your editor and make sure that you can open the map cleanly in here. If you bail out of your i3D file in the text editor and then open it in there and then discover something corrupted it, and you're not able to open it, well, then you're up a creek. Whereas if you leave it open in the text editor, you can always hit this handy dandy undo up here and undo what you did until you get it to a point, where it's a stable version. I've learned that the hard way many times, but fortunately in this case, we were able to open it, and what it does helpfully for you is it gives you another foliage layer, in our case called spring wheat windrow. So if we wanted to put it down, we could put some down. That's kind of what the windrow looks like, so we know that it works in here, but we still got some work to do to make it function in the game. So let me see here. I added all those. The next thing I had to do in the map, now that I've added it to the i3D file, I need to tell the game that, hey, this special windrow exists and you need to go find it. We can put it in here and it can work, but if you don't tell the game that you created it, it'll just kind of sit there inert and it won't do anything with it. So in the sample mod map Lua file, most maps of this era had one. This is kind of the base directory for the map. It had sample mod map Lua. I just opened it. I think I already explained some of the changes I made with the PDA map. So I just added another line in here to register the fruit. So I registered spring wheat. I don't put windrow on there. I think later versions maybe you changed kind of how you'd add a fruit. But I kind of have the rules up here, in terms of how it's supposed to be added and all the attributes, name, need seeding, allow seeding. So I put false on these because we're not intending to sow spring wheat. All I'm doing is using spring wheat kind of as a placeholder to get a special windrow for it so I can harvest it. I'm manipulating the game to get it to do what I want. So need seeding, false. Allow seeding, false. Has straw. Oh yeah, we wanted to have straw. And then there's some other minimum harvest growth state. We could probably cut it, I think, at 1. So that's probably too low. I probably should raise it higher. And some other things in here. We could give it a HUD, seed uses per acre, whatever. I think it's less critical over here. The most critical pieces are up here. We wanted to have a windrow. This little true is going to send the game. This registers it as a crop, and the game is going to go hunting for the windrow. And probably would have an error if it wasn't able to locate it anywhere in the map. But see, we have it. Spring wheat spelled exactly the same way, underscore windrow, and here's spring wheat the same way. So it's going to find it and hopefully will work. Now, another problem that we run into whenever we have, and I kind of described it just a little bit ago, these other multi-layers, you may have noticed you can't plow them out, you can't cultivate them out. So in order to get rid of the windrow, if for any reason we ever would want to cultivate it, I don't know why we would want to cultivate or plow it, when we should harvest it instead. But the point is to get rid of it somehow, we need to have a means of doing it. Because if we don't, it's just going to sit there. And the only way to get it out is going to be to combine it. Because we're going to create a means to do that. But I wanted to add something to where we could get rid of it if we wished. So we did that with some additional code that I put in here. I gave it a local variable destroy to equal the function utils update destroy common area. And I just heard the bell, so I think we're going to pause here just for a moment. I'm going to continue this in another episode. There's still a few more things to go over and then to showcase it how it works kind of in game. So I went as fast as I could, but there's obviously quite a few things here to cover. So thank you so much for watching here, and we'll be back on the next one. Thank you.